So we've got a couple objects that have been made using the lathe tools and stuff. So we've drawn some splines, we've used our reference images. I'm going to hide these lights and the grid, because I hate the grid. I set up a camera, which I would recommend you guys do once you've made the basic shapes of your objects. So I just have my couple bottles and this little cube they're sitting on that eventually I'll turn into a wooden table. But I just want to make sure that you guys set up your render settings, so either 8x10 or 10x8, and it's important to set the inches and the DPI to this. All these numbers are not default, so you want to make sure you punch them in correctly. And then set up a camera, and I showed you guys some of my reference images, and that's how I kind of came up with this kind of artsy camera angle. So with that being said, I know that I want to apply a label texture to these objects because I'm doing a craft beer, and a very important part of this product, or my product I should say, is the presentation, the advertising, the label. So how do we go about starting that? That is a good question. So I've got lathe objects still. So in order to start UV mapping, we have to make these editable, like when we hit C, the Make Editable button. But before we do that, I want to make sure that I make copies of everything. So I'm just going to hold down Control, drag a copy of this, and I'm just going to name this group Back Up, and I'm going to turn off its little traffic lights. And then that way, if I mess something up, I want to work as non-destructively as I can. That way I don't goof something up. So I guess just for the time being, I will still hide these lights. There we go. And I'm going to turn this setting back down for us, just so that we can see the viewport all clear. Alright, bottle. So I've got a bottle and a can. I'll start with the bottle. So I'm going to solo this. So I click down on the S, held down, and I'm on single. So this will just hide all the other junk in my scene. It's not getting rid of it. It'll just be a little easier to work with. So hit C on my keyboard, and we can see now that I've got a polygon mesh object now, and we've got this checkered thing over here called the Uvw tag. Now this is something that you've seen, or at least it's been there if you haven't noticed it or not, but we're actually going to put it to use now. I know in the desk and in some of the other scenes that we've been doing, sometimes we use like a cubic or a spherical mapping when we make a texture. If we apply a texture, we change this UV mapping to perhaps cubic or spherical, but you're kind of at the mercy of what the program gives you. So to break free of what the program is telling you, so that way you are in control of the program, to do that you want to do UV mapping. And to really get into that, we want to switch our layout, this button up here in the top right, and we want to change to BP UV Edit. So when I click that, it changes the interface quite drastically, but that's alright. So we still have our viewport that we know and love, and we still have our object list, although it's smaller and down here now. So I've got my bottle number 1 selected, and then over here, which is where our object menu used to be, this is our UV space. So what a UV map is I'll just open one up to hopefully explain to you guys. UV map. So what a UV map is it is a two-dimensional representation of your 3D object. What I mean by that is if if I look up like a bear pelt rug. So we've all seen one of these before on like a movie or a TV show or something. So this bear skin rug used to be a three-dimensional object, right? It used to be a bear that occupied all three dimensions, and now it is only occupying one dimension. Or technically, I guess it's two, because it's going left and right and kind of front to back. So what this is, UV map character. This is a good one. So this shows this kind of knight guy or whatever he is. And we can see there's this huge mishmash of all these different parts of him, but this is his texture. So if this guy was like in a game or whatever, the game artists would have these areas laid out, and this is what they would use to paint on, you know, the stripes onto his pants, and the bandages, and the kind of dirt, and his armor, and all that fun stuff. So we're going to go about making a simplistic version of this, because a character is obviously a lot more complex than a bottle in terms of how many pieces it has, but the theory in the process is the same. It's just a little bit more involved for a character. So over here we see that we don't see anything, and the reason for that is because we need to drag this checkered UV tag over here into this portion, and now we see this like grid of lines and stuff, and it's kind of somewhat sort of reminiscent of what these look like. We can see all these lines in a kind of a grid thing for this character. So it's important to note in a lot of aspects of 3D, you want to, especially if you're on like a tight time limit, kind of like we are in this course, you want to work as efficiently as possible. You only want to have to do as much work as kind of is required. Obviously you have to go a little bit above to get some of the extra points, but it doesn't make sense, you know, to I don't know, to make like 80 beer bottles that are all completely unique if, you know, you can make one and then use different textures or something. So what I mean by that is we are only going to UV map a portion of this. And if I look at this picture of this bottle, I only need to UV map the portion where I plan on putting a label, which is only about half of this object. If you're doing a cereal box would be probably the whole object as opposed to half the object. But in the case of a bottle, because we have a glass material on most of the object and a label material on only part of the object, we only want to UV map part of it. So I'll show you how we kind of can visualize what we're seeing here. So if I select these polygons, if I just use my good loop select, so this is pretty close. I'm just going to select some of these polygons. So this is about, I think, probably as much as that I would need to do as far as where the label would be placed. Maybe I don't even need that far down. So we see our object, and we see that what we have selected, and we can see over here on the right, this looks kind of weird. It's definitely not really that apparent or kind of obvious what's going on. So with that said, I am going to make us a checkered material. So I double clicked the little shader ball, and I'm over here in our good material window, and I'm going to go down to surfaces, checkerboard, and I'm going to click the checkerboard, and I'm just going to do like 10 by 10 instead of 1 by 1, so that we can see we've got a nice tight grid of checkers on our material preview, but when we see our bottle, we get more kind of like rectangles Now this isn't good. The reason for that is because I know my checkers are supposed to be square on the material, but on the object they are not squares. They're a lot taller than they are wider. And there's a reason for that. And it is because, actually I think this is sideways. Yes, this is all sideways, because if I selected one horizontal part of my bottle, and I wound up getting a vertical stripe over here. So what I want to do actually is Control A to select all, and then go to transform, and I want to, actually I think I can rotate it manually. So I'm in my rotate tool, and okay, so I'm clicking rotate and nothing's happening, right? I'm clicking and I'm moving my mouse, and the reason for that is because I'm on polygon selection. So we know these buttons, model select, polygon select, edge select, and point select, but now we've got a couple other buttons over here that we haven't seen before, and these are the UVs, the UV polygons. So I don't want polygon, I want UV polygon to be selected. And now with my rotate tool, I want to rotate from the middle, I think. Yeah. So it's going to be a little hard to line that up, so I think I actually do want to do 90 and then click apply. Good. So now if I go back to polygon select and I select a horizontal strip of my bottle, I'm getting a horizontal strip in my UV map. So if your object may or may not be sideways, like mine, and I know now that it's right side up because if I select one here and then I select the next one up over here, I'm selecting the next one up over here. Whereas if I had this 180, sorry, so this looks pretty similar over here. I just rotated it 180 degrees, but if I select that one, now I'm actually going upside down in my UV map. So we don't want that. So make sure you're right side up. And now I'm just going to select these portions where I want my label. Cool. That looks pretty accurate. So I see I've got a very small portion of my UV map selected, but I've got like a whole bunch of other junk that I don't have selected that is occupying my space. And by space, what I mean by that is, if I just move this off screen, we see that we've got a little gray box here. And now it's very important, if you're doing a texture, to stay within this gray box. That's just a rule. It's one of those rules. Eventually you'll learn how to break that rule, but for right now it's a rule. So I'm going to put this back, and I know that I've got a small portion of my bottle selected, basically the important part visually over here. I have all of it selected, but I'm not using my space very effectively over here on the right. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to invert my selection, and I can do that by hitting U and then finding invert, which is I. And so what that did is it selected everything that is not my label in this case. And what I want to do with all this is I want to shrink all this down to be really teeny tiny. So I'm going to grab my scale tool, and I am going to grab up from that corner and shrink all these down super duper small. There's really not like an exact science to this, so just make it small. And then I'm going to grab my move tool, which is just E. I'm going to bring that down. I know that I want to bring it down to the right, bottom right corner. So that's cool. So that's all out of the way. And now I see that I've got a lot more gray space that's open, but my bottle, oopsie, I can hit UI to uninvert my selection. So now that I'm back on my label, I want to figure out this whole checkerboard supposed to be square but is actually rectangles situation. And I know that the reason for this is because in one dimension, I'm not sure if it's left and right or up and down yet, but I know one of these dimensions is not sized correctly. Because if you held up a square piece of paper in front of you, and if you just imagine shrinking it kind of left and right, so that it becomes a vertical rectangle instead of a square, right? If I bring my hands in, I'm now making like a tall rectangle if I've got my imaginary cube in front of me. And that's kind of what's happening. We've got a tall rectangle, but we want squares, even sized squares. So we want to scale this. Now the trick for that is that if you just hit T and you scale this up or down, sure, these rectangles are going to get bigger or larger, but they're still going to be rectangles. They're not going to turn into squares. So what we need to do is we need to click and hold down and go to non-uniform scale, because this will allow us to scale either left or right or up and down instead of doing both of them at once. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in, and I'm just going to try and click and drag it sideways. So I'm over on the right, I'm making my UVs wider, but I'm actually making the squares, or rectangles in this case, even more rectangular. I'm going the wrong way. So I want to shrink it down this way, I think. And now again, this is one of those not exact sciences. Unfortunately, Cinema doesn't have super precise tools for this use case. So you kind of just want to line it up, kind of eyeball it the best you can. So this doesn't look too bad. I think I can maybe scale it a little bit more.
Are you clicking and dragging?
Yes, I'm just left clicking and dragging, just the same way that we use our normal scale tool. Okay. I just have to make sure that I'm in the non-uniform scale tool. So we can see that before, my stripe used to be the whole width of this UV map, and now it's a lot skinnier. So now that I've got squares, I am free to switch back to my scale tool, and now I can bring these back up. And what I want to do is I want to make these as large as I can, but within the size of this gray box. I don't want to exceed the size of this gray box. So this is a little hard to see, but if I kind of zoom in, hopefully the recording will catch. I'm pretty close within. I can go just a little bit more. Oopsies. I'm actually going over on the other side. So I want to grab my move tool, move these back over, just kind of eyeballing it. So this looks pretty close. And now I want to again grab my move tool, and actually I probably want to bring these all the way up towards the sort of towards the top, and then reline them up. So I'm within the gray box on the left, and I'm within the gray box over on the right, and I'm within it on the top, and I'm within it on the bottom. So I have succeeded as far as my UV mapping stages go. UV mapping stage goes. So this will cover anything that is cylindrical in nature, and we can see if I look all the way around, I see my checkers all line up, which is good. I'm going to mess this up just ever so slightly just to illustrate a point for you. So where is that scaling from? Here we are. So we can see that I'm very close to the line. I'm just a hair over on the left, but over on the right here I'm a lot over. And what you're seeing here is you're getting like a weird stripe. So these checkers should be nice, even checkers that line up with each other, but what we're seeing is a checker that doesn't line up with itself. We're seeing like an extra checker, which is bad. And that's what going outside the lines will do. So you want to stay within the lines. It's a coloring book. So I'm just going to undo back. Good. Alright, so I'm back to, I've got my squares. So I am ready for my label. So I would take some time, if you are following this bottle example, take some time to pick a brand of some sort of bottle and go on Google and come up with, either find an example of their label if you're picking an existing brand, like maybe you want to do whatever this brand over here is. If you can find this label as a texture, then by all means go ahead and do that, because I want to focus on the UV mapping portion. This stuff's kind of cool. But you will obviously need some sort of image now that we've gone about setting up how to apply an image to an object. We now need an image. So I luckily should have one of those handy.
Do you need a JPEG for that, or?
We'll go over that. So if I jump back to my old folder, and if I open up this with Photoshop, hopefully. So we'll see what we've got here.
And do you cover this UV in the old videos?
Mm-hmm. I'm doing it a fair amount quicker right now, but yeah, I do cover it in the old video. So I'm not sure if that opened or not. Cool. So, alright, couple steps that we're missing over there. Right. So, there's alright, so I jumped over a step, which is good for you guys. Not really. So now to, once you've decided on an image, oopsie, file new, holy crap, this is difficult. Back to Photoshop, sorry. So I made a new document, and oopsie. So I made it 2048 by 2048. We'll go over those numbers again in a moment. So I just have a blank canvas here. And there's a reason that I made it those sizes. And the reason for that is because we want to apply our label. So we found a label on the internet, or maybe we made one in a previous like typography or some sort of design, product design class. So however we go about acquiring our JPEG or our image, there's one step that we jumped over on how to actually bring that into Photoshop from Cinema. And that missing step is we want to, this is always really fun to do live, so bear with me. We want to click New Texture, and that is File, New Texture over there. So we're going to type in 2048 by 2048, and we can turn that to black, that's fine. So this is going to be UV bottle layout. So you can title this whatever makes sense for you, but for me, this is the UVs of a bottle, so I want to name it that, so that way I know what I'm working with. And I can hit OK. And we can see over here now on our UV space, we've got a black background, and that is that black color that I just inserted. And now if we jump over to layers, Just like in Photoshop, we've got layers here in Cinema. So we've got a black background, and there is one thing that we need to do that is always really fun to find. Here it is. So, without deselecting my object on the left, I haven't like clicked or started editing or working with anything. It's kind of important to do this all in one swift series of steps. I want to click Layer, Create UV Mesh Layer. And it'll be a little hard to see what that did, but I kind of just know from experience that I know that it worked because I'm seeing these weird white lines showing up. So now I should be free to deselect. So I've got like these white lines, and it's just hard to see on the monitor, but there's a bunch of white lines here, and these are visible here. I can turn the little eyeball off on that layer. So now I want to save out. I want to save out this. This is what this is called. It's a UV snapshot. It's kind of like the term for it. We want to save out. When we were looking at this, we want to save out a version of this character thing so that we know where we want to paint or apply our label texture. So that's what all these white lines are over here. They're the same white lines that are visible right here. So we want to save those. So I can go to File, Save Texture. Now I'm not like saving my project, I'm saving the texture. It's important. Important distinction there. So I can save it as a Photoshop file, that's fine. So I'm going to go to my folder. I'm just going to make a new assignment 3. UV layout. Make a folder there. So I'm going to save this bottle UV layout. Cool. Alright, so I can open that up now in Photoshop. Go to... So here we are. We've got our black layer, and we've got our white checkered lines. So if I want to apply whatever bottle texture that I've made or I found, however I've acquired it, I want to make sure that I put it within these white lines, because we did all this work setting up where these white lines, or where this this grid is for our UV map. You know, we've done all this work. It would be dumb to not put it to good use. And I'll show you an example of doing that incorrectly, just so that you can avoid that mistake. So this is a little label that I came up with last semester. So I'm just going to duplicate it over to this one. So I've got this image, right? So I can drag this up. And now this is where I would probably want to place my image. I'm fitting it within the white lines here, but if I put it down here, we'll see that it'll get cut off. So I'm just going to save this out and just show you guys how to do it improperly, just as a learning experience. So UV layout, so this is going to be bottle, label, texture. And I can save this as some sort of file that has an alpha map, or an alpha channel. So in my case, like PNG or TIFF would work. I like PNGs, so I'm just going to do a PNG. Turn that junk off. Cool. Alright, so let's make a new material. And I should probably save this scene file. So I'm going to go find that texture file, the bad one that I just made. That looks great. And then now I need to apply it to my object. So that's awesome. That looks really good. So this is what happens when you go outside the lines that you made for yourself. We can see that our object is cut off, and it looks like the alpha channel is also probably messed up, possibly. So let's just turn, I'm just going to turn these layers back on, and it's important that when you're saving out your texture that you're turning off these layers within Photoshop, because if I leave these white lines on, these are going to be visible within my texture. Now if I'm doing some sort of like cereal box like Kellogg's or whatever, a Kellogg's box doesn't have a bunch of white lines like going up and down it and kind of like zigzagging and crisscrossing all over the place. It's just
PNG is a transparent file, so whatever space is white or left blank is going to transfer over.
right. And even just in the color channel, if I like had my layers mixed up, we can even see now that this white grid is over, it's on top of my image, which is totally not what I want. So I'm going to put this back in place properly. Just use my arrow tool, kind of size it up. So I think, at least for me, I want to maximize as much as I can. So I'm getting really close to the bottom and really close to the top. So I think I should be happy with that. I think, fingers crossed. So now what I want to do is save out one version of this, or actually I want to save out two versions. So I want to go back to PNG, and I want to overwrite that bad one. So this is going to be my label. Yes. Okay. Cool. And then I want to save out another one that is going to serve as my alpha channel. Now doing the alpha channel is going to be a little different than maybe you might expect. So we all know an alpha channel is going to look at white and black values in Photoshop, just like how masks work. If I made a mask and I filled that mask with black, now I can paint in, nope, that's not it. If I can click white, and there we go. So now I can paint in white, right? We know how these work. So I just want to delete that. So I want to fill this whole area where my label is. I want to fill this all with white. Now it would be a really huge pain to go in and like select this like tiny fine text and fix all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an adjustment layer, and that is down here. It's called Color Overlay. And if I select white for this value and hit OK, it's going to fill white in all over there. So this is a very clear and concise white and black UV map, or sorry, alpha map. So I'll save this as PNG. This will be bottle layout alpha. So if your label has transparency or any sorts of cutouts, this is going to be a very important step for you. If you're doing like a full-sized cereal box, then you might get by without having to do this step. The alpha, I should be specific. So if I go back to this material, I can click this texture, and I can click reload image, and because it's the same file, it's named the same, it'll just update in here, and we can see that it's not, Cinema is not recognizing our alpha channel the way that we want it to, and it never will without a little bit of help. So that little bit of help is this alpha checkbox. So I can check on this alpha, and what I want to do here is I want to load an image, and I want to load in my alpha here. I can click no. So because this is the same image, it's just one version is my texture and one version is my alpha, I know that they're going to line up properly. And so if I zoom in, I know the resolution of this isn't, it's not the greatest, but I know that it's all there. I think there might be some, nope, there's a whole bunch of checkboxes here on this alpha channel, and sometimes if you mix up your white and black values, you have like an invert button, which might come in handy for you. But I think for the most part, there we go. So I made this a little higher resolution by going to Editor and then selecting 2048 by 2048 because that was the size of the texture that we used. And I think it's not exactly lined up. Or maybe it is, but it's just looking weird. Weird. It's looking right when I render it. So I think that'll cover the texturing and UV mapping stage of this assignment. I think we'll probably wrap it up there. So it would be a pretty good thing if you guys had your objects made and you had made some progress or completed the progress on the texturing portion by the end of Thursday. Not that it's due, it's just that's kind of my recommendation. Because either on the end of Thursday or on the beginning of next Tuesday, we'll go over the lighting and the rendering, and we'll try to wrap this up as quick as possible, so that way you'll have hopefully a good amount of work time. But I think that'll wrap this up for now. We know how to make our objects using the lathe tool. If you have any other objects in your scene that you want to learn how to make, hopefully if they're not super complicated, I can walk you through.
We have to do this step on every object.
Well, the answer to that technically is yes, but you can get around that by say you are doing bottles and you're going to do 4 bottles, let's just say. You can UV map the first bottle and then just copy that bottle. Like you'd make like 3 other copies. You don't have to UV map each bottle individually if they're all going to have the same or a similar sized label.
Well, I have 3 labels that I created, and